This is David Dubal, and my guest today, one of the great pianists of our time, Rudolf Firkušný. It's a great honor to have you here at WNCN, Maestro.
Thank you very much.
Today on this program, I hope you don't mind, I have taken the liberty of programming some of the music, and we're going to start a little later on with one of the most famous pieces of music in the world, and nobody thinks it's for the piano. It's the Dvorak Humoresque. And then we'll hear some Chopin, and then a whole Beethoven sonata, the Moonlight itself. And Mr. Firkušný, I have heard you many times in my own life, and never once without coming out of the hall, not only inspired by the exquisite tone colors that you're able to blend from a piano, but always from your architectural sense. Some people, and I'm serious, have everything, and you're one of them.
It's a very, very complimentary. Thank you very much.
The last time, well, let me say, the first time I think I ever heard you was in concerto performance, and I'm pretty sure it was in Cleveland with George Zell, the Beethoven Fourth.
Mm-hmm.
George Zell was some conductor, wasn't he?
Oh, fantastic.
You two got along well?
Very well, indeed.
I thought so in that performance. Tell me a little about George Zell, because he is someone that probably represented one of the most powerful forces in conducting. When did you first play for him?
Well, I met, as you probably remember, George Zell was for a certain time the conductor of the German Opera House in Prague.
Yes.
And he came there already from his engagements in Germany, and so he was already known man by this time. But I didn't meet him in Prague, strangely enough, because I was still living in Brno, which is my town. And only I heard very wonderful comments about his performance in the opera. And then I decided to go to study with Schnabel. And that was shortly after the Hitler took over Germany, and Schnabel emigrated or left Germany and established himself in Tremezzo, which was in Lago di Como in Italy, and he continued his classes there. So instead of going to Berlin, which was my original idea, I went to Italy and spent the summer there with studying with Schnabel. And one day, one of the visitors to Schnabel was George Zell, and that's actually the first time I met him. And we didn't have much opportunity to talk, but I mean, I finally was able to know him in person. And then I already was living in Prague at this time, and on the 28th of October in the old Czechoslovak Republic was the so-called national holiday. That was the proclamation of the independence. And so George Zell called me by telephone in Prague and told me if I would play with him the Dvorak concerto, because he wanted to make a Czech program for this particular day in his theater. And of course I was thrilled, no. But I told him, but Mr. Zell, you never had me play. And now I'm sorry not to be modest, but he said, well, what Schnabel told me about you is good enough for me, and you play. And so we played for the first time, and it was really, it clicked so beautifully, from the very, very first moment that we established right away a wonderful kind of musical and even, I would say, the human relation. And he became a wonderful friend to me through the years. He engaged me, then he left Prague, and he was for some time conducting in Scotland. He engaged me to play with him in Scotland, and when he came to America, I saw him quite often in New York. And really, it was somebody I turned very often, to ask him his advice and his ideas, because he was not only a wonderful conductor, but he was a tremendous musician.
And a wonderful pianist.
Excellent pianist and great authority, especially on his repertoire, which of course included the greatest classical works.
He was an awesome personality to some people, and they were frightened of him.
People were frightened because he was very uncompromising, of course, and he was difficult to hold himself, and he expected, of course, the same from the other people. But I really, personally, I must say, I never found him difficult in a way that it would be unpleasant.
How interesting.
I mean, he was difficult in his demands.
Yes.
But as a man, he was not unless he was so completely against something, then he let his voice talk. That's natural. But I never had this opportunity. But as I say, I mean, our relationship was very, very, in a way, quite close for many, many years. And he had a certain list of people he liked, and all these people can't say one wrong word about him.
That's right.
And of course, to make music without him was a tremendous inspiration, because it was always so wonderful.
So the first work that you played with him was the Dvorak
Concerto, yes, in Prague.
And of course, you made a very, very well-known recording of that.
We did a recording later, yes. Which was a good recording. The only thing is that at this time I was still playing the version of my teacher, Wilhelm Kurz, which I don't play anymore now. I play now the original version of Dvorak.
Yes. Why was that? Because it was too long, they thought then, or?
Well, partly it was too long, so we had to make some cuts, which also now I discarded. But I studied this concerto with my teacher, was Mr. Kurz, who made this pianistic revision, and I didn't at this time had any other material for this concerto unless I would have taken the score, so I played this version, and Zell liked it very much. By the way, Zell was very happy with the version, and we decided to record it this way. And of course, I said with few cuts because there was the length of the recording. But now I play the original version.
Yes.
Because I came through the experience of playing it so many years and so many times to the idea that really the very awkward writing of Dvorak in this particular piece is really very characteristic of Dvorak.
Yes.
And if you, as I say now, I don't look so much now at this concerto as a piano concerto. I look at it much more as a symphony with a piano, or eventually as a big chamber music work, where the piano is not predominating in a way of virtuosity, but is part of the musical message of the work. And some of the awkwardness, it's really very typical, because it reminds a little bit his writing in his chamber music works.
Yes.
So, as I say, you can't make from a Tchaikovsky or Rachmaninoff concerto because it's simply not there,
Yes.
So, I mean, in this case, I think it's better to play it as it was written. So that was the reason I changed completely now, which was a very, very difficult job. It's much harder to change something which you played to something which you didn't play, than to learn a new piece.
Absolutely.
Well, to speak still, to go back to George Zell, besides that, he liked Dvorak very much. He was very, very devoted to Czech music, and he was very devoted to Czechoslovakia, because he somehow always had a great fondness for his stay in Prague. He was also the first conductor in the German theater who was able to make a bridge between the German audience and Czech audiences, because there was a German audience which was not as numerous as the Czech audience, but still was a very good audience. Mm-hmm. But they went exclusively to the German theater, and the Czech theater. So it was a little bit of the separation. And Zell was the first conductor who first of all started to produce the Czech operas in the theater, Janáček, Dvořák, and so on, Smetana. And then he was engaged, of course, by Czech Philharmonic, to conduct the orchestra. So that was the first time that suddenly these two things went together, which I think was a tremendous achievement. And I think Zell was very happy for it, because he really wanted to do it.
So he was an historical figure, really, in the
cultural
life.
In a way, yes, he was. And then he was very attached to Prague. Mm-hmm. Mrs. Zell is from Prague, his wife, his widow now, and he loved the city and he loved the musical life, and so he kept wonderful memories, and that somehow stayed with him all his life. He always had a soft spot for everything what was Czech. He even spoke Czech, he learned Czech and spoke quite well.
He is in every way, of course. He was an amazing intellect.
But I mean, then I will finish. But I mean to tell you the very wrong idea that he was absolutely autocrat and that you
an ogre,
that you couldn't discuss with him. I remember very well that once he played a Mozart concerto, we always played before on the two pianos, because to have a little conference. And in one particular place, there are some staccato notes, you know, in the piano part, which I played without pedal. And they turned to me, why don't you take pedal? And I said, well, if I consider the pizzicati which precede this part, I have the feeling that maybe this is a continuation. Say, you are right, and put it down. No, so that he was absolutely wonderful if he agreed.
Yes.
He was not so that he put a knife on your throat and say, unless you do it this way, it's wrong. So that I think is sometimes not just that people think that he was such a terrible dictator.
Well, I think he respected you, of course, tremendously, and he also knew that you were a composer and had a very, very fine sense of what was going on in the orchestra, too.
Well, that maybe was part of it, because when the first concert, as a matter of fact, which I played with him in Prague, he was programmed on the program, the Mahler, the songs, you know,
The Wayfarer?
Wayfarer,
Yeah.
which I knew intimately well. And so he was very much impressed.
Oh, that's wonderful.
That I don't know all the piano literature, that I also know the other literature.
My guest today is the great pianist Rudolf Firkušný, and we have been talking about his experiences with George Szell and playing the Dvorak Concerto. And from the word Dvorak, the name Dvorak, we're going to hear a piece which comes from his album on Candide of the complete humoresques for piano, Opus 101, as well as the Mazurkas, Opus 56. You see, people don't really know that Dvorak composed piano music. They only think that they're going to hear on the violin the G-flat humoresque, and we're going to hear the original Mr. Firkušný in your performance, the most famous piano piece probably ever composed by a Czech master. Rudolf Firkušný in the humoresque number 7, by Antonín Dvorak. Oh, what a charming, charming performance. And I know that performance, Mr. Firkušný. I think everyone should buy this album because there's more than 7 humoresques. There's 8 of them, and they're all wonderful. But I just couldn't resist opening the program with the most famous.
They were composed in this country,
Yes.
as you know.
Right after this message, we're going to come back and discuss more about your great career. This is David Dubal, and it's my honor to have as my guest today here at WNCN Rudolf Firkušný. Born in not Czechoslovakia, it wasn't known then yet as that, but Moravia, which is now Czechoslovakia, as well as Bohemia and so forth. You studied with a composer that only in the last generation, and even within the last 2 decades, is not only coming into his own, but he's considered one of the giant composers of the 20th century, and that is Janáček. You were nothing more than a boy when you came to this man who was supposed to be also a rather difficult figure.
Yes, I was exactly 5 years old when I met him. It was by pure accident, because I was actually born in a very small town in Moravia, and my father died when I was 3 years old, and my mother decided to move to Brno, which was a larger city, because we were 3 children and the question of education and all this. So we moved to Brno, and I already started to flirt with the piano in this age, of course, in very simple way and very not knowledgeable way. But when we came to Brno, I was desperately eager to find some teacher he would teach me, and nobody wanted to accept me because they said I'm much too young and I should wait until I go to school and so and so and so. So I just did it practically by myself. But then I found one teacher who gave me the elementary things, to know where the keys are and how to put the hand in. But after very few lessons, I wasn't terribly satisfied with him and left him and played just my own way, which was predominantly, in what I heard. I played at home, what I remembered, what I heard in the music, what they were playing in the Sunday concerts, the little bands in the parks, or some of the operas, and then I kind of improvised a little bit what came in my mind. And so the word came around, that there is this little brat,
little infant wonder,
flying piano, and nobody was really musical in my family, to the extent my mother was not really musical. She didn't know what to do. But one man came and said, look, it seems that this boy has really talent, and I think somebody should hear him and decide if it's the case or not. I will arrange for him to meet Janáček. And of course, my mother was a little bit worried, because he had a pretty bad reputation at this time as a very impatient man, as a very difficult man, as very rather unpleasant sometimes man, and especially a great enemy.
Over 60 then, right?
Over 60 years. Great enemy of children prodigies. We just hated them, So, with a kind of trepidation, we went to Mr. Janáček, and he saw me, and he was wonderful. I loved him from the moment I walked in the room. I still see it like it will be yesterday. And he gave me a very tough examination, to my ear. I played all kind of very complicated accords, which I, from the corner, named, of course, right away. Then he touched my head and did all kind of things with me.
What do you mean, touch the head?
Head,
Oh.
head, because he somehow believed that there is some kind of different formation of the head if there is a musical disposition.
Really?
He was extraordinary man in many ways, he was interested in so many things, not only in musical field. And then he told me, well, now play for me. So I played, and I had a really nerve to play my own version of the little chorus from Janufa, in the last act when the girls are singing before the marriage, the little tune, which he very kindly appreciated and was very sweet.
Well, that was very diplomatic of a 5-year-old.
It was diplomatic. It was very, very courageous, I must say. And then I played whatever. I loved at this time the 8th Slavonic dance by Dvořák, very much. So I played in my way the 8th Slavonic dance by Dvořák. And I remember the Janáček said, well, my dear, it's okay. But and he bit to the piano and started to play it himself, of course, 3 times or 4 times as fast as I played it, and showed me how it should sound. And then he decided that I am talented, and he told my mother, look, if you trust me and if you will do exactly what I have in my mind, I will take responsibility to guide his education, which was he found a piano teacher for me, and he taught me composition and the elementary theory. And he also insisted very much that beside music I have to follow my general education. That was one of the conditions, and of course not to become a child prodigy in the proper sense of the word, although I appeared before the pipe when I was 10 years old.
Very early, yeah.
with his consent, because it was a part of conservatory, regulations. And so we started to have this wonderful, wonderful relation. Again, the same as I said before, Mr. Zell. I never heard one strong word from him. He had the most extraordinary patience with this child. You can imagine. He was so terribly kind to me, and he never treated me looking down on me. I mean, he treated me as a human being. He always was very serious. It was never baby talk. It was always up to the point. And of course, with the years, when I was getting older, it was becoming more and more interesting and more deeper. And then I think he had some kind of special affection for me because he lost his son, when he was a baby, and his daughter.
Now, how was your relationship with him since you lost your father? Did he become a father figure to you?
I would say spiritual. Not. Although he also was extremely kind in a way, because our situation was not very brilliant, as you can imagine, and he was very helpful in providing some means of support for my education.
What a human being!
I had just received recently from Czechoslovakia some letters which he wrote on my behalf, which I'm very proud. When he was recommending me for some stipendiums or for some, he really took a tremendous interest, which was amazing, because at this time he already was starting to be well known, because it was after the premiere in Vienna of Janufa, which started his international recognition. And then, as you know, that his greatest creative output was in his last years. I mean, he wrote more between 60 and 74 when he died than he wrote actually before this age, because he did other things. And so he was terribly occupied with himself and with his work, and he still found time, to do that. He didn't teach anymore. He was at the beginning professor of the conservatory, but the higher thing.
Sure.
Yeah. But then he resigned because he decided he has no time. But he kept me always as a private student, so I went to him twice a week. And then later, of course, when he decided that I should really do it the proper way, because his way of teaching was very unorthodox. It was not really following the general idea of teaching harmony and counterpoint and whatnot. I mean, he was just doing it his way, which was extremely interesting, but it was not what a really well-prepared musician should know. So he told me, "I'm ideal, you have to go to do it the proper way." So he told me go to the conservatory as a composer, because piano I was practically finished at this time, and start to do the composition at the conservatory, which I did. But then I saw him not anymore as a student, but more as a friend. I went to him to, first of all, to discuss with him his composition, which I played, to have his idea. Then very often he called me and we played when he got to prove the edition of Katya Kabanova, the things we played it for hands, to have done many mistakes. Then he started to teach me, to show me the interesting new works, which we played sometimes forehand, sometimes he forced me to read a score like the La Mer, the Debussy. I'm still sweating when I think of it. And then somehow it was a very nice relation, which lasted practically until his death. I saw him the last time before he died in June, and he died in August. I still played for him. The last thing I played for him was the violin sonata, with a friend of mine who was at the conservatory. We had to play the conservatory concert. And in one of his very last letters which he wrote, That was after he finished the second string quartet, and he wanted to have it performed in small town in Bohemia called Písek, where the lady of his, Mrs. Stessel,
Yes.
was living. And
That's the intimate pages, or the
intimate letters, yes. And he wanted to have a premiere there. And in one of his letters, which is also in the book, he writes that he knows that these people in Písek would like to have the concert of his own works, which he doesn't want. But he wants that the string quartet is first performed there by the quartet from Brno. But then he also knows that they want to engage me for the concert. That he will arrange that I go there and I will play some solo, and then I will play the violin sonata, and then his quartet. And then he is offering that he will take the expenses on him. So that was one of his last letters, which that the concert never took place because he died. Yeah. And of course, as I said, one of the most wonderful things in my memory was that I was able to attend with him all the premieres of his operas. Incredible. Starting with Katia Kabanova in Brno, his release premiere in Brno, in his box with Mrs. Janáček, and he and I were 3 people there. And I heard all of them, with exception, of course, The House of the Dead, which was after he died, and then I was with Mrs. Janáček, with whom I also retained very close relation after his death.
That's just an extraordinary story, and to begin this relationship at 5 years old, and here is a man that is really just at that time past 60, blooming as a composer. It was an amazing thing. Right after we have these words, we're going to return with some more music, and we will be hearing, not unfortunately at this moment, Janáček, because we have, of course, put your recordings of Janáček on, but they're not going to fit right now. But we will return with a movement of a Slavic composer, and that's Chopin. We now return. That was a very exciting discussion about Janáček. When you grew up, though, was Chopin, the poet of the piano, was he always on your piano?
Yes, actually from the beginning. Also, Janáček liked Chopin very much. He was very fond of Chopin.
The third sonata in B minor, it's from an old recording, and I'd love to hear the first movement. How about that? Would you mind?
That's perfectly all right.
We are now going to hear Rudolf Firkušny's performance of the first movement of one of Chopin's great works, the third sonata in B minor. You have just heard the first movement of the great Chopin Sonata in B minor, Opus 58, in the hands of Rudolf Firkušný. Right after this message, more music and more discussion with my guest. So good to have you here, Mr. Firkušný. We have about 2 minutes to talk before we end our program with the first movement of the Waldstein Sonata. Beethoven seems to be the fascination of every musical mind. Is that right?
That's absolutely right, yes.
Why does Beethoven have this quality above so many other, even romantic composers? Is it a staying power? Is it some structural depth?
It's combination of all things in a way, because first of all it's absolutely fascinating just to go through the Beethoven's creation from the early years up to the last years, and to see this enormous development and enormous progress in way. And beside that, it's always a great challenge, even from the purely pianistic point of view, because there are always new problems to face and new problems to master. So it's absolutely, it doesn't end, the study of Beethoven. And the whole musical personality of Beethoven is really so extraordinary, that I think this is the reason that everybody is coming back to it always.
It always amazes me that Beethoven, who we think, of course, as a very complete long life, never lived past 57 years old.
I was very young.
What an accomplishment.
Fantastic, yes.
And yet, not to have heard the music in the last stages.
Well, that is one of the greatest tragedy, but on the other hand, maybe that was the reason for this development, in the completely different spheres which human ear normally would hear. And he heard it, of course, in himself, but it was not anymore considered to be heard by other people. And I think in a way that's the explanation from this extraordinary, the last string quartets, for instance, they are going way out of everything, Missa Solemnis, all these things. That's, I think it's as tragic as it is, and maybe it was a kind of reason for this enormous development in this direction.
This interior hearing was so unique in the history of
yes,
that it was beyond physical. And
exactly, yes.
And somehow this brought a development. So of course individually it was tragic, but for the art of music,
it was of course. But as I say, one never knows. And beside that, Beethoven was not like Mozart. Mozart was even more extraordinary because he died still much younger and wrote so much. But he composed very fast. Mozart, yes. He had found fun. But Beethoven was a hard worker. If you see the sketches, you see how many times he was laboring over the most simple theme, which finally came in the definite form. So that's amazing, this was going on in his mind. It's extraordinary,
yes.
Simply.
It never stopped, the building of the sonata structure.
Everything.
We're going to hear such a perfect example of a first movement of a Beethoven sonata, the Waldstein, written for his patron, Count Waldstein. It's Opus 53. It's truly in C major, and it's played in a brilliant performance by my guest today, Rudolf Firkušný. Ah, we have just heard a wonderful performance to end this program, Mr. Firkušný, of your own performance of the Beethoven Sonata in C major. It's the 21st of his 32 sonatas. I thank you for coming here. I wish we had more time to talk, and hopefully we will soon.
Thank you very much.
This is David Dubal. Thank you for listening.